I'm Mike Levin.
I'm Douglas Dillard.
I'm Alfred Shehab.
I'm John Schaffner.
I was born in a small village in Nebraska.
I see you found
I'm a product of the AIDS, the Depression period.
box of my things. Infantry's tanks and smoldering airplane wings.
I found myself on the high seas, headed for Battle of the
These
Bulge.
old pictures are cool, tell me some stories. Was it like the old war movies? Sit down, son, let me fill you
The
in.
early morning of the 16th, when the shelling began.
Where to begin? Let's start with the end. This black and white photo don't capture the
You
skin.
could see hundreds of
From the
Germans.
flash of a gun to a soldier who's done. Trust me, grandson, the war was in color.
I was an only child. I, of course, turned 18 and registered for the draft. That was about the only way you could join up in those days. I was out of high school 2 weeks when I was called in. I think it was rough on my parents. Everybody had the same thing on their mind, and that was join up with something and get it over with as soon as possible. How could these dirty names bring themselves to do this to us, you know?
But the biggest thing, the country had its problems. It had isolationists and all that.
Yeah.
It became one. This country became one mass of people, all with the same dedication of winning the war.
It did that.
And that was something.
So we're green as grass, right? We get off the train at Fort Jackson, South Carolina. We got our uniforms by then. And we're marched down to Battery Street and assigned to barracks. And that was all. Just throw your stuffle bags on a bunk and that's your bunk. Well, we didn't see anything the rest of that day, but that night we went to bed, and when we woke up in the morning, this is in 1st of March, it's pretty cold. And it was raining cats and dogs, and the wind was blowing the rain up against the barracks and the sheets. And I looked out the window, and I thought, well, with the weather like this, we won't be doing much today. Yeah. Well, next thing you know, the sergeant comes in and rattles the garbage can and says, everybody out in the street for roll call. And we walked out into the street with our raincoat and helmet liners, and we stood there in the driving rain and answered roll call. And I knew then that weather was never going to be a factor. When I first joined the 106th Division, I heard that it was a motorized division. And we went out marching around Fort Jackson and looked at the motor pools, and there was hundreds of trucks in there. Hundreds. I thought, man, this is great. We won't have to be marching. Guess what? We never did get in those trucks for about 6 months.
I got into the Army in '42. Spent a year as an enlisted man up in the Arctic in Greenland at a forlorn cold place called Bluey West 8. And then they sent me back to Fort Sill, Oklahoma, where I was commissioned in the field artillery. And before very long, I found myself on the high seas, headed for Belgium, the Battle of the Bulge.
Mike, that had to be the Queen Elizabeth.
The Queen Elizabeth.
Yeah,
yes, I was one of the loading officers on the ship. We had 2 gangways On my gangway, we loaded 7,500, and on the other gangway, we loaded 7,500. It scared me to have 15,000 men on one ship crossing the Atlantic full of German submarines. I didn't care for that idea. You know, you talk about a ship being torpedoed. The SS Dorchester,
Yeah.
I believe, was the ship that was torpedoed. It's the one that had the 4 chaplains that
Yes.
held their hands and went down together.
Well, you know, those 4 chaplains that went down with the ship had life preservers, and they gave them to 4
Yeah, they stayed on
young
board.
people
Yes.
that didn't have any.
That's right.
Well, I can tell you guys about our convoy that was attacked in the Mediterranean, but going back to the beginning, my story is a little different from the rest of you, being a juvenile teenager. I'm a product of the Depression period, and things were pretty rough in Georgia. At that time, my family really suffered during those days, and I think it had a lasting impression on our rather conservative attitude for the future. And then when the war broke out, as I said, I could hardly wait to go, so I pressured my mother into letting me enlist. Well, after I enlisted, I was sent to Camp Walters, Texas, and in July. Enlisted on the 3rd of July, 1942. And I got there just in time to start that summer cycle of training. And it was really, really torturous. At that point, we had to take a physical training exercise to go in the airborne. So you had to learn to do tumbles and front flips and 100 push-ups. And
How many?
Oh, at least 100, because the instructor there said, we're here to make an opinion as whether you're determined to accomplish something, because if you're going into the paratroops, we got to know you're going to be determined to finish your mission. So they would stand there and count, and you may have a slight break, but you had to do it. And by the time we finished, and the guy came over and said, congratulations, you passed. It was great relief, but you're exhausted, because a lot of people didn't make it. They gave up.
Yeah. I saw 2 movies when I was a young fellow. The Charge of the Light Brigade with Errol Flynn and The Lives of Bengal Lancer, and I decided I wanted to be in the cavalry. France had succumbed to the German attacks. This General de Gaulle got over to England and started the Free French movement. I heard about it and found out he had a man in New York representing him, and I went there and spoke to Jacques de Sillé and volunteered. I got up to Montreal the next day to go to Halifax. A good friend of the family showed up, and I jumped up and, what are you doing here? She said, your father found out about this escapade of yours, and I'm to take you home. I said, oh no, I'm a lieutenant now. And she said, oh no, he spoke to de Sillé. So I went back and enlisted and for the cavalry. And I went through basic training at Fort Knox. The commission they gave was infantry, parenthesis armor. And the night before graduation, I went up to the commandant and told him I couldn't accept an infantry commission. My family have been horsemen, not for generations, but for centuries. And I just couldn't do it. Next morning, my commission read cavalry.
It's a good thing they didn't put me in the cavalry. I only knew 2 things about horses. One end bites and the other end kicks.
What was so interesting to me was meeting people from all over the country all of a sudden. I led sort of a sheltered existence as far as the group go. And here were people coming from Montana, I never thought of Montana, all over the country.
Where to begin? Let's start with the end. This black and white photo don't capture the skin From the flash of a gun to a soldier who's done. Trust me, grandson, the war was in color.